Namo tassa bhagavata arahata samma Venerable Bhante, friends, seekers of peace and harmony, certainly those who organize a meeting like this are seekers of peace and harmony. Those who attend a meeting like this are also seekers of peace and harmony. Vipassana meditation is nothing but an art of living, how to live peacefully, how to live harmoniously. Life is full of agitation, full of misery. From time to time, one keeps on generating defilements, cravings, aversions, hatreds, ill will, animosity, fear, passion. And one becomes so agitated. One becomes so miserable. And whenever one becomes miserable due to these defilements, one never keeps this misery to oneself. One keeps on throwing this misery in the atmosphere around. The entire atmosphere gets permeated with tension, misery. Anyone comes in contact with this atmosphere becomes miserable. This is certainly not a way of life, not an art of living. Remaining oneself miserable, making others miserable. Once someone gets fully enlightened, he finds out a way how to come out of this misery, how to live a life of peace and harmony. Such an enlightened person, in the language of India of those days, was called a Buddha. Buddha is not the name of a person. Buddha is quality of a person. Anyone who gets enlightened is called a Buddha. And anyone who gets enlightened teaches nothing but a way of life, a code of conduct, art of living, how to live peacefully, how to live harmoniously, how to come out of all the miseries of the life. All the miseries of the life. And Vipassana meditation is the heart of his teaching. Anyone who becomes Buddha teaches this technique of meditation which helps people to live the life of peace and harmony. To practice Vipassana, one has to walk over the path which is called the Eightfold Noble Path. Noble in the sense that anyone who walks over this path is bound to become a noble person. Anyone. One may belong to this caste or that caste, this community or that community, this country or that country, this color or that color, this sex or that sex. Makes no difference. Any normal, average human being, if one walks on this path, one is bound to become a saintly person, a noble person, a good person. This Eightfold Noble Path is divided in 3 divisions, in the language of those days, called Sila, that means morality, Samadhi, that means mastery over the mind, and Panya, that means wisdom, insight. Total purification of the mind by wisdom, by insight. In the first division, the division of Sila, morality, we have 3 parts of this Eightfold Noble Path. Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva. Samma Vacha, right speech, purity of speech. The entire path is path of purification. To live a pure life, all our actions must be pure. So the action at the vocal level have to be pure. What is the purity of the vocal actions? To understand that, let us understand what is the impurity of the vocal action, and if you abstain from that impurity, what remains is the purity of vocal action. The impurity of vocal action. If one speaks lie to deceive others, it is impurity of the vocal action. If one speaks harsh words which hurt other people, harm other people, does not help anyone, it becomes impurity of the vocal action. One speaks words of backbiting, slander, becomes impurity of the vocal action. Or one speaks useless words, meaningless words, wasting one's own time and wasting the time of others. It is impurity of the vocal action. If one abstains from these 4 impurities, what remains is the purity of the vocal action. The next, Samma Kammanta, purity of the physical action. Again, understand what is the impurity of the physical action. The only yardstick to measure the impurity is that any action, vocal or physical, which harms other beings, which hurts other beings, is an impure action. So at the physical level also, any action which harms other beings, hurts other beings, is an impure action. At the physical level, one kills any other being, it becomes the impurity of the physical action. One steals something, snatches away something, robs something which does not belong to him, it becomes impurity of the physical action. One commits rape, adultery, it becomes impurity of the physical action. One gets highly intoxicated, it becomes impurity of the physical action. One abstains from these 4. What remains is the purity of the physical action. And the next, Samma Ajiva, right livelihood. Everyone must have some means of livelihood or the other. This also must be pure. Again, the same yardstick, any livelihood which brings money to me but which harms other beings is not the right livelihood. If my means of livelihood encourages others to break their sila, it is not a right livelihood. The means of a livelihood that I adopt is only to exploit others, harming others, not a right livelihood. Human being is a social being. He has to live in the society. The motivation of the livelihood, if this motivation is only to exploit, to harm others, just to accumulate money, then it is not the purity. But if one realizes that I am a member of the society, I have to play my role in the society to help others, to assist others, then this motivation makes the livelihood pure, without harming any other being. If we have a livelihood which does not harm any being, it is a right livelihood, purity of livelihood. All these three, Samma Vacha, Samma Kammanta, Samma Ajiva, they all come under the division of Sila, morality, to abstain from all such actions which are impure in the sense that they harm other beings. And whenever I perform any action at the vocal level or physical level which harms other beings, I simultaneously start harming myself. This is the law of nature. I cannot perform any action at the physical level or vocal level, harming other beings, without generating tremendous amount of defilements in my mind, anger, hatred, passion, fear. And whenever I generate these defilements in my mind, the nature starts punishing me. I become so miserable. Whenever I harm anybody at the physical level or vocal level, simultaneously I start harming myself. This is the law of nature. And the teaching of Buddha is nothing but law of nature, universal law of nature, applicable on one and all. But if the teaching had ended there, just in a sermon, that, oh, you people of the world, you should not kill, you should not steal, you should not do this, you should not do that, then it would not have worked. The teaching would not have been complete. An average person at the intellectual level understands very well that I should not perform such actions which are harmful to others because they simultaneously harm me. I should perform only healthy actions, wholesome actions, which are good for others and are simultaneously good for me. Accepting this fact at the intellectual level, and so also accepting this fact at the emotional level or devotional level, does not help. One has to accept it at the actual level. At the actual level, it becomes so difficult. An example, someone is addict. He knows perfectly well this addiction is no good for me. Wants to come out of it, but cannot come out of it. When the time comes, he does something which he should not do. It is all because he has no control over the mind, no mastery over the mind. Therefore, the second division of Dhamma, the second division of the teaching of an enlightened person, how to control the mind, how to become the master of the mind. And that division is called Samadhi. Again, in this division, another three parts of Dhamma: Samma Vayamo, Samma Sati, Samma Samadhi. Samma Vayamo, right type of efforts, right exercises. If the body becomes very weak, one cannot take even 2 steps firmly, starts dangling here and there, then someone advises better take some physical exercises, make your muscles strong, become firm physically. Similarly, when the mind becomes weak, it requires some exercises which will make the mind healthy and strong. Any exercise which makes the mind healthy and strong is a right exercise. There are 4 right exercises. You examine your own mind, and if you find that you have got certain bad qualities in your mind, take them out. First good exercise. Again, you examine your mind, and if you find that you do not have a particular type of bad quality, then all the doors of the mind are closed. Don't allow this to come in. Second good exercise. Again, examine your mind, and if you find that you have got some good quality, good virtues, without developing any pride or ego, just accept it, retain it, and multiply. Third good exercise. Fourth good exercise, again examine your mind, and if you find that it does not contain a particular virtue, particular good quality, open all the doors of the mind. Welcome, this good quality should come in. Fourth good exercise. These are the only 4 good exercises which are called Samma Vayamo, which will make the mind strong, healthy. And the next, Samma Sati, a right awareness. Awareness cannot be of the past. Of the past, there can be only a memory. Awareness cannot be of the future. Of the future, there can be only some desires or some fears. The awareness can only be of the present moment. Awareness of the present moment is the right awareness. Whatever reality manifests itself at this moment, if one is aware of it, and from moment to moment, whatever reality manifests itself, you are aware, you are aware, you are aware. That is a wonderful exercise which will make the mind healthy, which will make the mind strong. Samma Samadhi, the concentration of the mind. But that again, Samma, pure. The mind can be trained to become concentrated with the base of impurity even. With the base of craving, one can train the mind to get concentrated. With the base of aversion, one can train the mind to get concentrated. With the base of imaginations, illusions, delusions, one can train the mind to get concentrated. That is not Samma Samadhi. With the base of purity, the reality as it is. You are aware of the reality as it is from moment to moment, without generating craving, without generating aversion, without any illusion, without any delusion. Whatever reality manifests itself, you are aware, you are aware, you are aware. This is a healthy exercise to make the mind strong, firm, healthy. These 3 come under the division of Samadhi. But still, the Dhamma is not complete. Whenever you practice Samadhi, you deal with only the surface level of your mind. the conscious mind. And most of the time, every exercise that you do has certain amount of suppression, which does not help. The impurities are suppressed. They go deep inside. And the problem of the life is at the deeper levels of the mind, at the unconscious level, at the half-conscious level. The whole life you keep on tying knots upon knots upon knots. The entire psychic structure, and along with that the entire physical structure, becomes a bundle of knots, Gordian knots, which keeps one so unhappy, so miserable, so tense. So unless we deal the problem at the deepest level of the mind, at the unconscious level of the mind, and unless we can purify the mind at the deepest unconscious level, the problem is not solved. So the Dhamma, the teaching of a Buddha, is not complete unless you come to the third division, which is called Panya, wisdom. Not the wisdom that one gets by reading scriptures. Not the wisdom that one gets by listening to Dhamma discourses. They are not your wisdom, somebody else's wisdom. You are just accepting it. Not the wisdom that you develop merely at the intellectual level. Again, not your wisdom, somebody else's wisdom. You merely intellectualized it. Your own wisdom, the wisdom that you develop at the experiential level, deep within yourself, is your wisdom. In the language of those days of India, the first was called Suttamai Panya, the wisdom that you develop by listening to discourses or reading scriptures. Second, Chintanmai Panya, the wisdom that you develop at the intellectual level. And the third, Bhavanamai Panya, and it is the third which starts purifying your mind to the deepest level, which starts opening the knots which you have tied deep within yourself, your own wisdom that you develop at the experiential level. Under this division of Panya, we have two more remaining parts of the Eightfold Noble Path. Samma Sankappa, right thoughts, purity of thoughts. Thoughts are there, not that the mind should become free from all the thoughts and then only wisdom will start working. Thoughts are there. Every meditator who starts working has to face so many thoughts. The mind is a chatterbox, keeps on chattering. But as one proceeds on the path, the thought pattern changes. Initially, when one starts meditating, the thoughts that come, they are full of very deep impurities, cravings, aversions, violence, hatred, ill will. But as one proceeds, one finds thoughts are there, but they are comparatively purer, better. Then you start understanding the reality at the intellectual level. Still it is not the Bhavanamai Panya. The next, Samma Ditthi, the right understanding, the understanding that you have with your own experience, to observe the reality as it is, not just as it appears to be, not just as it seems to be, as it is, in its true nature, in its true characteristic. When you start observing the reality as it is, the illusion is passing away, delusion passing away, all kinds of hallucinations, confusions pass away. You are developing your own wisdom at the experiential level. And this is what is called Vipassana. Here you start purifying your mind at the deepest level. All the deep-rooted complexes start coming on the surface, and you just observe them as they are in their true nature. Whatever is impermanent, at the experiential level you understand, yes, it is so impermanent. It arises just to pass away. It arises just to pass away. The entire physical phenomena, becomes so clear, it is merely arising, passing away, arising, passing away. The entire mental phenomena becomes so clear, arising, passing away, arising, passing away. The combination of these two, nothing but a phenomena arising, passing away, arising, passing away. It also becomes very clear that this changing phenomena is so impersonal. No I, no me, no mine. What a great illusion of this I and mine. Without the wisdom gained at the experiential level, one keeps on developing tremendous amount of attachment to this I, mine, I, mine. The entire physical structure, the psychic structure, the combination of the two, I, mine, I, mine. And with this attachment of I, mine, one keeps on generating nothing but misery, unhappiness. At the intellectual level, one may understand, one may accept, but it doesn't work. When you go deep inside and you experience how the entire phenomena is so essenceless, so substanceless. What I am calling I, what is this I? What is this mind? And when you experience it, then the illusion goes away, the delusion goes away. Then the purification of the mind starts. All those knots which you are tied in the past, they all get opened up. You stop tying new knots and you open up your old stock of knots. Then you also understand that something which is so substanceless, so essenceless, which is not I, which is not mine, which is constantly changing, constantly in a flux, in a flow. Again, at the experiential level, when you start experiencing it, you also note that whenever out of ignorance, you develop any craving for it, you develop any aversion towards it, you develop any attachment towards it, you become so agitated, so miserable. This characteristic becomes so clear. Anicca, changing, anatta, no I, no me, no mine. And dukkha, suffering. Wherever there is attachment, there is suffering. Wherever there is craving, there is suffering. Wherever there is aversion, there is suffering. At the experiential level, one starts understanding all this. Layers after layers of the impurities come on the surface and get eradicated. Come on the surface, get eradicated. Upajjitva nirujjanti, upajjitva nirujjanti. As much as the impurity has come on the surface and passed away, that much one is free from misery. When all these impurities come on the surface and pass away, one experiences something which is beyond the field of mind and matter, which is beyond the entire sensual field, which is beyond the field of relativity, something beyond that. One may call it by any name. We call it the stage of Nibbana, which is beyond the sensual field, beyond the field of relativity. One experiences that, and one comes out a totally changed person. The whole life pattern changes. The tendency of the mind to keep on generating out of ignorance, keep on generating craving, aversion, and experiencing nothing but misery. At the conscious level, at the intellectual level, one keeps on fooling oneself, deceiving oneself. I am such a Dhamma person. I understand Dhamma so well. I understand teaching of Buddha so well. I can write books on that. I can give lectures on that. I can discuss with people and establish the teaching of Buddha as the best teaching in the world. But at the actual level, deep inside, same craving, the same aversion. One keeps on talking about this anicca, everything impermanent. But one keeps on developing tremendous amount of attachment to whatever one likes, tremendous amount of aversion, whatever one doesn't like, and keeps on generating nothing but misery. One keeps on talking that there is no atta, there is no I, there is no me, there is no mine, but keeps on building tremendous amount of ego. I, mine. One keeps on talking about misery, but cannot do anything to come out of the misery, because all these intellectual gain does not help. We keep on wasting our entire life either playing this intellectual game. I understand the teaching of so-and-so. Now I understood the teaching of so-and-so. Or the emotional game, devotional game. Because so-and-so has said that, and I have got great devotion in this person, so this is perfect, perfectly all right, I accept it. Merely accepting the reality at the intellectual level or accepting the reality at the emotional or devotional level does not work. One has to accept it at the actual level, apply it in practice, and that cannot be applied unless you develop your own wisdom at the experiential level, going deep inside. And that is what is called vipassana. Vipassana is to observe the reality as it is, at the experiential level. If you are only accepting at the intellectual level, it is not vipassana. If you are accepting it only at the emotional level, devotional level, it is not vipassana. When you start observing the reality at the actual level, at the experiential level, then it becomes vipassana. Even before someone gets full enlightenment, this remains an accepted fact that whenever any impurity arises in the mind, one becomes miserable. So the only way to come out of the misery is to come out of the defilements. The speciality of Buddha is anyone who becomes fully enlightened, whether he is Gautama Buddha or any other Buddha, makes no difference, that he goes to the deep level, deepest level of the problem. It is not diverting the mind to solve the problem. There had been techniques which were going on even before Gautama Buddha got enlightenment, which are still going on. Whenever any impurity arises in the mind, a solution is divert your attention somewhere else. If you have got great devotion in any deity, in any god, any goddess, or any saintly person, start reciting his name mentally. You will find that particular impurity which was overpowering you, say anger as a reason, that was trying to overpower you, or a passion trying to overpower you, fear trying to overpower you. You start reciting the name of a god, goddess, any saintly person, your mind gets diverted, and you feel you are free from it. A solution, good solution, to some extent, it works. Even today it works. But one who gets full enlightenment, he does not get full enlightenment by reading scriptures. He gets full enlightenment by observing, like a scientist, observing the reality to the deepest level, exploring the truth, reach the ultimate truth. Then it becomes so clear to such a person that whenever we divert our attention, we divert the attention at the conscious level only. Deep inside, it keeps on boiling, keeps on boiling. Anger has come, I divert my attention somewhere else, I feel that I am free from anger, but deep at the unconscious level, at the half-conscious level, I keep on boiling in anger, keep on boiling in anger. It keeps on multiplying, multiplying. Sooner or later, again, it erupts like a volcanic eruption. Again, I am overpowered. This is not a right solution. So the right solution was found. Anyone who becomes fully enlightened finds out a right solution, and the right solution is neither suppress nor give it a free license. Observe, observe. Whenever any impurity arises in the mind, observe, observe. Mere observation, without any reaction, just observe, just observe. But it is not easy to observe. When anger arises, it is so difficult to observe anger as anger, abstract anger. You close your eyes and try to observe anger. The object of the anger, that will keep coming in your mind. So-and-so said like this, so-and-so did like this, it so happened. And when you keep on remembering that, this is a stimulation to your anger is multiplying, you can't come out of it. So also fear, so also passion. It is so difficult to observe abstract anger, abstract fear, abstract passion, any abstract defilement of the mind. But one who becomes Buddha finds out wonderful solution for that too. It is quite true. You can't observe anger as anger. You can't observe hatred as hatred. You can't observe fear as fear, passion as passion. But certainly, you can observe your respiration. You can observe some sensation on the body. And any time an impurity arises in the mind, two things start happening at the physical level simultaneously. One at a little gross level, that is the respiration. The respiration will lose its normality. Whenever anger arises or fear arises or passion arises, the respiration cannot remain normal. It will lose its normality. And at a subtler level, throughout the body, some biochemical reaction or the other will start. You will have some sensation or the other on the body. It is true that to observe the anger as anger, passion as passion, fear as fear, is not easy. If you train yourself under a proper guide, very soon you reach the stage where you can observe your respiration, where you can observe the sensation of your body. This becomes so easy. You are not diverting your attention. You are observing the same impurity which has arisen. This is the two sides of the same coin. One side of the coin is the impurity which has come on the mental level. Other side of the same coin is the respiration and the sensation that has manifested itself on the body. That is why he taught this wonderful solution, the wonderful way. Observe your body. Kaya anupashyana. Observe anything that arises on the body. Any sensation. Vedana anupashyana. Observe your mind. Chitta anupashyana. Observe anything that arises in the mind. Dhamma anupashyana. And out of all these four, so much emphasis was given to the Vedana, to the sensation, because whatever arises on the mind, it must arise with a sensation on the body. Whatever arises on the body is nothing but a sensation. So if you start observing the sensation, the problem is solved. Sabbe dhamma vedana samosarana. Everything that arises in the mind culminates in sensation on the body. If you learn how to observe sensation on the body, a very good solution is found. Even observing the sensation on the body is not that easy. Therefore, in these courses of 10 days, when a student comes there, one has to work with Sila, the 5 precepts. For these 10 days, one has to observe these precepts very scrupulously. Whether one had been observing in the past or not doesn't matter. But now that one has come to learn this particular technique, for these 10 days it becomes absolutely essential. With the base of this Sila, the 5 precepts, then you start learning how to observe your respiration. You have to train your mind to observe the natural respiration as it comes in, as it goes out. But a new student, at times it becomes difficult how to observe the natural breath. It is so soft. Then one is allowed to breathe slightly hard. A few slightly hard breathing, not very hard, slightly hard breathing, and then come to the natural, normal, yatha bhut, as it comes, as it goes, as it is. When the mind gets trained to observe the respiration as it comes, as it goes, working like this for 2 days or 3 days, you start experiencing some sensation or the other in this area. Then you switch to Vipassana, you can feel sensations throughout the body. A wonderful solution is found in the life. Whenever any situation arises in the life, anything happens in your mind, starts reacting to it, reacting with craving or reacting with aversion, starts any defilement. You can start observing your respiration. You can start observing your sensation. You stop tying new knots. You stop generating new defilements. And not only that, the law of nature is such that you have started opening up the old ones. The old impurities which were lying so deep, when you start observing them at the level of sensations, with equanimity, without craving, without aversion, you will find layers after layers. They come on the surface, and if you are equanimous, they pass away. upajjitva nirujjanti, upajjitva nirujjanti, te sangbhupasamo sukho. Whatever impurity has come on the surface and passed away, that much you are relieved from the misery. If all these impurities come on the surface and pass away, you are get relieved from all the miseries. The mind becomes so pure. For that one is to practice. Merely understanding it at the intellectual level does not help. Merely accepting it at the emotional or devotional level does not help. A Buddha becomes Buddha by practice. And someone can get the real benefit of his teaching by practice. And the practice is the practice of Vipassana, observing the reality as it manifests itself from moment to moment, with equanimity. And this cannot be done unless you start with Sila, morality. It cannot be done unless you have a little bit of concentration with the reality. That is why Sila takes you to Samadhi, Samadhi takes you to Panya, and once you start developing your Panya, Panya will start helping your Samadhi, Panya will start helping your Sila, all these three will start helping each other, and you keep on developing. It's a lifetime job. People come for a course for 10 days just to get ABCD of the technique. The first step on the path. One has to work for the whole life. I feel myself very fortunate that my forefathers, who were originally from India, they came and settled down in Burma, the land of Dhamma. We are not the entire population, but few people maintained the purity, the pristine purity of Buddha's teaching at the practical level. From teacher to pupil, this purity was maintained there. And I feel myself very fortunate that I was born in that country. I feel very fortunate that I came in contact with this wonderful Dhamma, the wonderful technique. It helped me so much. And now that I distribute to others, I find how large number of people from different communities, it makes no difference. One thing which I understood by my practice of Dhamma is that an enlightened person never establishes a religion. He never establishes a sect. He teaches universal Dhamma. The law, the nature. Dhamma means law, nature. Not necessary that people should get converted from one organized religion to another organized religion. It is not going to help. Someone may call oneself a Buddhist. Someone may call oneself a Christian, a Jew, a Hindu, a Muslim. It makes no difference. So long as one practices Sila, Samadhi, Panya, which is the law of nature. You work according to the law of nature, you come out of the misery. Dhamma is to make a person a good person, a healthy person, living a harmonious life, good life, happy life. Then the society will become healthy. Individuals have to become healthy. Let them call themselves by any name, it makes no difference. The Dhamma is to purify the mind so that one can live a real, happy, harmonious life. And I have found during the last 13 years, thousands of people who have come, they have come from different sects. Leaders of different sects have come. Hundreds of Christian monks and priests have come. Hundreds of Jain monks and nuns have come. Similarly, large number of Buddhist monks have come. Large number of Hindu sannyasis have come. Leaders from every sect. And everybody who has come and passed through the technique has found the technique so universal. Our melody is universal. So the remedy has to be universal. It can't be sectarian. Cannot be sectarian. The melody is that I become miserable whenever I generate any defilement in the mind. Whenever I generate anger or hatred or passion or fear, I am bound to become miserable. You can't label this. When anger comes, you can't say this is Hindu anger, this is Muslim anger or a Christian anger. Anger is anger. And the misery that comes because of anger, you can't label it again. A Hindu misery or a Buddhist misery or a Christian misery. It is misery. Law of nature. The melody is universal, not sectarian. Therefore, the remedy cannot be sectarian. It has to be universal. You observe your respiration. You can't say that this is Hindu respiration or a Buddhist respiration. Respiration is law of nature. You are breathing in, you are breathing out. You start observing your body. You start observing the sensations on the body. You start observing the defilements on the body. with the sensations on the body. It's universal. You can't name it as a Hindu or Buddhist or Christian. The remedy has to be universal, and it is universal. Therefore, the technique does not convert people from one religion to another religion. Conversion is there, certainly, but the conversion is from misery to happiness. The conversion is from bondage to liberation. The conversion is from impurity to purity. May the suffering humanity get this wonderful path, the wonderful technique to come out of all the miseries in which it is involved. May pure Dhamma, universal Dhamma, free from all kinds of sectarianism, spread round the world to help people to come out of their misery. May all beings enjoy real happiness, real peace, real harmony.
I believe Dr. Goenka was willing to accept questions.
Yes, if there is any question. Good, no question. That means this course was very clear. Very good. Be happy. Be happy. Be happy. Oh, come.
Why aren't people going sadhu?
Sadhu means well said, well done. There was a tradition in India 25 centuries back which somehow...
You misunderstood the question.
Pardon?
Why aren't people saying it at this stage?
Yeah, that's what I am telling you. That's what I am telling you. There was a tradition in India 25 centuries back which got lost there, but which was maintained in the neighboring countries. The tradition was that if someone performs any action, physical, vocal or mental, for the good of others, for the benefit of others, then at the end of that, he will express his wishes that because of this action of mine, may all beings be happy, may all beings get benefited. Then those who listen, they also join in this joy, because he says that with joy. They join in this joy and they say, well said, well done, we are with you. And that in that language was sadhu, well said.
Yes, but usually when you talk, people say at the end of your talk.
That is students who understand that they say like this. Not necessarily, it's not a rite or a ritual.
It's only your disciples.
Yes, those who have taken the courses, they know this, and they, with all the joy in their mind, they also feel that may all beings be happy. They are with us in this. There is no rite and ritual on the path of Dhamma.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. No.
There is no rite or ritual on the path of Dhamma. Nothing should be done as a rite or a ritual.
If you're a layman.
Yes. Yes.
You were speaking of the experience of being caught in this I, and really feeling the human person, the miseries, to be freed from this. Would you care to comment on the experience of I, which fills a person with joy, peace, and gratitude?
There is nothing wrong in this enjoyment of peace. But when you start developing attachment to it, that attachment comes because of this ego. I am enjoying it. And this attachment of ego takes away all the joy. There is no real joy. Because whatever you are enjoying, if it is an enjoyment at the sensual level, then it is just a phenomenon which arises and passes away. All the sensual pleasures that you enjoy, if you develop attachment to them, then you will feel so dejected and depressed when you miss them because of the attachment. But by this practice, it becomes so clear that all these sensual pleasures that they come They are so impermanent, they pass away. I've got no control over them. If really I am enjoying, and if they are my pleasures, then I must have control over them. I must have mastery over them. Otherwise, what is mine? If something is mine, I must be the master of that. And look, I have got no control over it. It just arises, passes away. Any sensual pleasure arises, passes away. Then this madness of I and mine will go away. For conventional purpose, of course, one has to use these words, I, mine, you, your. But the attachment that develops with these words of I, mine, with ego, that brings suffering. That will become clear by this practice, and one will come out.
I guess I'm not speaking on a level of sensual joy. I'm speaking, say, on a very deep level.
When you come to that deep level, then I has got no importance at all. Because we are thinking of deep level at a very high level. So I is so important, I am going to enjoy that. Still I is so important. But when you reach there, the ego gets dissolved. There is just joy, that's all. There is just joy. Now the I is so important that I must enjoy. Reaching that level, I must be there to enjoy it. When you reach there, then this question doesn't come at all. There is only joy, that's all.
All right, but instead of the I, the experience of personhood.
Yes. A feeling feels. There is nobody to feel. And that cannot be understood at the intellectual level. When you reach that stage, it becomes so clear. There is no I to feel it. Just things are happening, that's all. Now at this level, it becomes so difficult. Without I, who is feeling? There must be some I to feel it. Because we live with this I. It is so important for us. But when you reach that stage when ego gets dissolved, then this question becomes meaningless. Come, try. Yes.
With all due respect, I came here because I felt I needed to come on.
Yes. Quite true. As I say, for conventional purpose, we cannot run away from this I. The I is there, the mine is there. But the attachment that you develop towards this I, or mine, makes you very miserable. And this you will realize only when you start going deep. Look, this ego is so strong, and because of this ego I am becoming so miserable. This is how you come out of misery. And that is why I say only these talks will not work. Because there is certain experience which is beyond the intellect even. Intellect is, of course, its own limitation. When you go to the subtler experiences, the intellect doesn't work. So you can't understand that merely at the rational level. Of course, it is very rational, all scientific. But at this stage, unless you experienced yourself the deeper truths, it won't work. So now at this stage, let there be I, doesn't matter. But come and have it dissolved, and then see what happens. Yes.
What would you say was the purpose of life?
The purpose of life is to come out of the misery. A human being has got this wonderful faculty which the nature has given, not to any other being, only to human being, that one can go deep inside, observe the reality, and come out of the misery. And we are not using this wonderful faculty which nature has given us. The purpose of the human life is to come out of this misery. Live a healthy life, harmonious life, good life, which we are missing.
Why then does the mind live in a state of illusion? Why do we live in that state of misery?
Pardon?
Why do we live in that state of misery? Why do we put up with it?
Because we have not developed our wisdom. We are living in the state of illusion. The nature has given us all the ability to come out of this illusion. But because we are not working in that way, we live the life of illusion. That is why we live the life of misery. If you use this faculty which nature has given, certainly you will be out of all the miseries. It is not to run away from the life. One has to live the life, happy life, healthy life, harmonious life, which is good for you, good for others. Dhamma is not to run away from the life, but to use that faculty of self-observation, the faculty of truth observation, and you are out of misery.
What part do others play in your life?
What part?
What part do others play in your life?
Everyone, every moment is generating something or the other. The mind is like a generator, keeps on generating some vibration or the other. And most of the time, the mind keeps on generating craving, aversion, all these kinds of impurities. So they keep on influencing you. But if you keep on purifying your mind, the mind will become so strong with the purity that you start influencing others. Then the vibration that you generate from your mind will be so pure, anti-aversion, anti-craving, it will start influencing others. It will be full of love, compassion, goodwill. It will influence others. You get influenced by others, so also you also can influence others. So develop your own purity and you find how you start influencing the atmosphere around you. Good, good. Good, we have this.
Dr. Goenka, on behalf of the Society, I'd like to present you with a small present. I think all that remains now is to thank Dr. Goenka for coming and speaking to us tonight.
I thank you and thank everybody for coming, given their time. Thank you all.